When Dalen Cross arrived in Greythorn Vale, the first thing he noticed wasn't the emptiness, it was the restraint. The town didn't feel abandoned, it felt as though everything inside it had agreed, silently, to stop at once. Houses stood intact, windows unbroken, doors closed, but there was no movement behind them. No flicker of life. Even the air itself felt controlled, like something unseen was holding it steady. Dalen stepped out of his car and waited, expecting the usual sounds of a rural place, wind brushing trees, distant animals calling, something ordinary to anchor him. But what came instead was delayed, as if it had to be chosen. A bark echoed from the forest. It resembled a dog's call, but the rhythm dragged, the tone slightly uneven, as though each note had been placed rather than released. Dalen stood still, listening longer than he should have, because something inside him recognized the problem immediately. The sound wasn't wrong in any obvious way. It was wrong in intention. It felt like imitation, like something deep in the forest had learned the shape of a sound but not the reason behind it. And as the echo faded too cleanly into silence, he realized something far more unsettling than fear. The town wasn't quiet because nothing was there. It was quiet because something else had taken control of when sound was allowed to exist. Inside the diner, the tension didn't disappear, it condensed. The room carried a kind of stillness that made every movement feel deliberate, every gesture slightly delayed, like people were thinking through actions they once performed without effort. Conversations existed, but they didn't flow. They started, stopped, resumed in fragments, as though everyone was trying to remember how normal interaction was supposed to sound. Iris Hale moved between tables with quiet precision, her footsteps light, her expression distant in a way that didn't suggest distraction, but careful. Awareness. When Dalen mentioned the sound he'd heard outside, the reaction wasn't surprise. It was hesitation. A pause too long to be casual. As though acknowledging the noise might give it permission to continue. Then, without warning, a howl cut through the air. It didn't build or fade, it appeared, fully formed, and then stopped just as abruptly. No echo followed. No natural decay. Just silence, immediate and complete, like the sound had been removed rather than ended. The entire diner froze for a fraction of a second, and in that moment, Dalen understood something deeply wrong. These people weren't confused by the noises. They were accustomed to them. And worse, they were careful not to react. Night didn't fall over Greythorn Vale, it settled in layers, slow and suffocating, until the world outside became something unrecognizable. Inside the boarding house, Dalen lay awake, his body still, his mind alert in a way that felt involuntary. The silence returned at first, but it wasn't empty. It felt occupied, like something was waiting for permission to begin. Then came the scratching beneath the floorboards. Not frantic, not random, but measured. Deliberate. As if something was mapping the space beneath him, learning its boundaries. A low whimper followed, soft and uneven, repeating at intervals too precise to be instinctive. It sounded like pain, but it lacked urgency, lacked variation. It looped. Again and again. And then, slowly, it changed. The sound began to shift into something closer to a human sob. Not quite right, not fully formed, but close enough to unsettle something deep within him. It repeated that too. Practicing. Adjusting. Refining. Dalen didn't move, because the realization came quietly, but completely. Whatever was beneath him wasn't expressing anything. It was learning how to. A morning didn't bring relief, it only revealed how much of the night had lingered. The town looked the same, unchanged, but now Dalen could see what he hadn't before. The way people avoided certain directions. The way their movement stayed within invisible boundaries. When he found Iris outside, the tension in her posture confirmed what the town refused to say out loud. She spoke carefully, choosing words like they might carry consequences. The sounds had started with animals, she explained, but they hadn't stayed that way. Over time, they had become more precise. More familiar. Deer cried like children. Birds called out names that shouldn't exist outside human memory. And sometimes, late at night, the forest returned voices that belonged to people who were no longer there. Iris didn't speak with panic, she spoke with acceptance, and that made it worse. When she warned him about hearing his own voice, her grip tightened just slightly, just enough to communicate something she wouldn't say directly. That the forest didn't just mimic what it heard. It improved it. It studied it. And once it learned enough, it used it. Dalen told himself he wouldn't go into the forest, but the sounds made that decision irrelevant. Curiosity wasn't what pulled him forward, it was recognition. The same uneven barking from earlier called to him again, but now it carried a familiarity that felt intentional. Step by step, he moved deeper between the trees, the space around him growing tighter, quieter, as though the forest itself was closing in to listen. The sounds layered over each other now, animal calls, distant voices, fragments of something almost human, all slightly out of sync, all adjusting as if trying to align. And then he heard it. His own voice. Calling his name. Not perfectly. Not yet. The tone was right, but the timing was wrong, pauses stretching too long, emphasis misplaced. It sounded like something thinking while speaking, deciding what came next as it went. Dalen stopped, every instinct telling him to leave, but the voice continued, closer now, more confident. And in that moment, he understood the true danger. It wasn't trying to scare him. It was trying to become him. When Dalen turned to leave, the path behind him was no longer where it had been. The trees had shifted, subtly but completely, rearranging the space in a way that felt deliberate rather than random. The forest wasn't just surrounding him, it was reorganizing itself around him. The sounds returned, louder now, layered into something unbearable. Barking, crying, whispering, speaking, all overlapping, all correcting themselves in real time. Then the shapes appeared. Figures moving between the trees, their forms unstable, as though they hadn't settled on what they were supposed to be. One stepped forward, its movements too smooth, too controlled, like it had studied how to walk rather than learned it naturally. When it opened its mouth, Iris's voice came out. Perfect in tone, wrong in meaning. Flat. Empty. Practiced. The others followed, each producing sounds that edged closer to reality, closer to truth. And Dalen realized, with a clarity that cut through the fear, that he wasn't witnessing random distortion. He was witnessing progress. By the time Dalen made it back to Greythorn Vale, the silence was gone, but what replaced it was far worse. The town had not returned to life. It had been filled with something else. Every house carried sound now, but none of it belonged to the people inside. Laughter repeated without emotion. Crying echoed without cause. Voices called out names with no understanding of who they belonged to. Iris stood in the street, unmoving, her expression fixed as something spoke through her without her participation. The sounds didn't match her face, didn't align with her breath. And when Dalen tried to speak, to call out, to make sense of what remained, his voice didn't come out the way he expected. It came out wrong. Lower. Warped. Repeated back to him instantly from every direction. The forest answered him, perfectly this time. No delay. No hesitation. And in that moment, as the echoes surrounded him, he understood the final truth. The forest wasn't learning anymore. It had already learned enough. Now, it was replacing.